I am very glad to be here. My name is Maarten L Albarda. I am on every conceivable network known to mankind. And the reason is not that I am some sort of sad, addicted social media or digital person. Well, maybe I am a little bit. But ultimately, I am on all of these things because I am a firm believer of learning by doing. And in my experience at Coca-Cola and then later on at Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is the biggest beer brewer in the world, I always felt that the only way that I can talk knowledgeably to any of the people that I was trying to explain the strategies or the opportunities about, the only way that I could do that knowledgeably was actually by being part of those platforms. And so for me, it's really important to actually understand the platform from within. And so I am on all these platforms. I feel that that is the only way that I can say, well, yes, Pinterest is really an opportunity or not, because I've actually gone to Pinterest, I've signed up to Pinterest, I've maybe created a board. I don't need to fall in love with Pinterest for the rest of my life. I don't need to spend hours every day on Pinterest. But if I do feel that it is something that I like, I will do it. But ultimately, what is really important as executives is to have some knowledge from the inside. So I always encourage people to try it. If you don't like it, that's absolutely fine. Don't use it anymore. But at least you've gone on it, you've seen it, you've gone through the consumer experience of these things. So that is the reason why I'm on all these platforms. And if you want to link up with me on any of these platforms, feel free to do so. The more, the merrier. As mentioned, I worked at the Coca-Cola company and at Anheuser-Busch InBev, the maker of Budweiser and Stella Artois and Beck's, amongst others. But before that, I worked on the agency side for 14 years, J. Walter Thompson, Leo Burnett, and McCann Erickson. Today, my business is really split into two pieces. I have launched a marketing change management practice in 2013. We have an office in London, and we have an office here in the US. And what we do in the marketing change management business is to work with big marketers who all talk about the fact that they understand that the world has changed, and they understand that their consumer has changed, and that that change is ongoing. But what they haven't done yet really is change the way they do marketing. And so that's what we help them do, because that's really what I did at Coca-Cola and at AB InBev. I also have a small private startup consultancy and advisory in which I work with a number of startups and other businesses that are part of what I call the new marketing economy, and help them perfect their product and their pitch and their commercial offering and so on and so forth. So that's the other side of my business. As I mentioned, Flock is what we call the first marketing integration and effectiveness company. And we really do a couple of different things. We find and organize the right marketing resources, which means helping marketers find how to optimize their current ecosystem, whether they are agencies, big data providers, whether it's their own organization, and so on and so forth. We help them do that. The second thing we do is that we make resources work together more effectively. So that is really all about process and systems, integrating technologies, and so on and so forth. Then we do project management, which is really where we help marketers maybe on the first time that they do a fully integrated marketing communications brief. We help them, we handhold, we maybe write the brief for them or help them write the brief, and we help them manage the whole process of that campaign. And then we help with measurement and evaluation at the end of that. I also wrote a book called Zero. The subtitle of the book is Zero Paid Media as the New Marketing Model. If you want to talk about the book, then it's #ZeroPaidMedia. And I was very proud when the book was voted among the 25 business books CMOs are reading this year, and that is the year 2014. So let's talk about where the world is today and why we may struggle a little bit. And I've tried to also bring in some specific Indian perspective into the presentation. Obviously, not being in the Indian market, I have only been able to find so much, but we'll go through it and we'll see how we go. So it seems like the world of marketing has gotten back on its feet. Obviously, there was a very severe and very impactful global economic crisis, that is still not over. There's still a lot of markets around the world who are struggling to come out, who are struggling with a slow economy, or are struggling with economies that seem to be sort of going up and down and up and down. But in terms of marketing spend, global ad spend, and this is a very recent article, will exceed the pre-crisis peak in 2015, and so it means that global ad spend really has come back from the dead. I looked at data for India, and it looks like in India also growth still continues, which is obviously a great thing, especially if you're in the media business. That means that budgets are still growing. I don't think they're growing all that fast, and so that may be a small point of concern, but the trend still is up. And so everything on the surface seems to be going well for marketing, and everything seems to be growing, and that's all positive. However, there is a challenge to marketing, and the challenge is called cost of paid media. The cost of paid media is a real concern. I work in my practice with the World Federation of Advertisers. We spend a lot of time with them on the IMC and the media forums, and every year the World Federation of Advertisers collects all of the media expenditure from all of the participating markets in the World Federation of Advertisers. And they do this through Accenture and a number of other media agencies, and then they create an average. And you can't read this, and that's not the point. The point is, by the way, for India, that the costs are going up across all the different media. And this was data collected at the beginning of this year, so it may have changed a little bit now that we're in October. But basically, for India, the prediction was that all of the media, paid media, would increase. Now, at the same time, your budgets are increasing, so you could argue, well, that's then not really a problem. But what I think is really a problem, not just in India, but globally, is that literally across all media, in all categories, across all markets, media inflation is going up. And in most markets around the world, that means that the cost of media is outpacing the cost of increase of budget. And if we look at India, I think that any marketer would struggle to really find, an increase of 12% on their television budget, or an increase of 17% on online display without having to make sacrifices somewhere else. So this is a real problem. The cost of paid media is just going up and up and up. And what that leads to, for instance, here in the U.S., and I realize that this is not yet the case in India, but what this has meant in the U.S., for instance, is that if you check the blue line, that is the average day part cost per thousand for total households in the U.S. And the yellow line, share of household audiences across all day parts. And so what you see here is the beautiful medium of, or the beautiful business of television in a lot of markets around the world, where the cost keeps going up and the delivery of traditional television is actually going down because it's being pressured by all of these other media that are coming in, specifically digital in online and mobile. And so this is, it's a beautiful business to be in if you're in the television business and you can get away with this, but at some point marketers are going to say this is no longer sustainable. It is just no longer realistic to keep pumping money into traditional media when the cost keeps going up but their delivery keeps going down. Television supremacy is under pressure. And this is true around the world, but also in India, as I mentioned. India television supremacy is still a bit stronger than maybe the global average. You can see here a number of different markets. But as you can see, television is being challenged by this new phenomenon called online video. In today's marketing world, between 50 and 80% of budget is still being spent on television. But what is really interesting is when you talk to marketers, is that 50 to 80% of a marketer's time is being spent on all that other stuff. Not just online video, but I've used it as a proxy for digital. So 50 to 80% of a marketer's time is being spent on talking about all these new types of connections, be they online video, mobile marketing, CRM, big data, and so on and so forth, whereas only 5 to 35% of the budget is going there. So there's a real disconnect, if you like, between where people are spending the majority of their money and where people are spending the majority of their time. And this is only going to continue as time marches forward. One other undeniable fact is that print media around the world is really the medium that has suffered the most from the onslaught of digital. And in the US, Google is now bigger than all newspapers and magazines, and that moment happened last year, and obviously that growth has only continued, and is obviously very bad news for print media. This is what happened with print media, again, in the US, according to the Newspaper Association of America. You can see here it was happy days until about the year 2003, 2004, and then the medium started falling off a cliff. That little red line you see is the income that newspaper media make through digital. So as you can see, digital advertising by print media is not the answer, because it does not close the gap between what they've lost and what they're gaining through the new digital media. I've also looked at India, and I saw some really interesting articles. Apparently this was a very hot topic that came out in that there was a report that said that the newspaper readership in India was also being challenged, but then the top media houses said, no, that's actually not true. The survey is wrong. And you'll find this a lot. You can obviously challenge the data when you don't like the data, but I think what is undeniably true is that whether you're in India, whether you're in the US, whether you're in Europe, print media do take a hit because of digital media, and that is something that is happening around the world. So we mentioned that digital advertising for newspapers has not really been the answer, but what everybody is saying is, oh, programmatic is the growth engine for digital advertising. That is going to be the future. And it is true that programmatic around the world is increasing at an incredibly fast rate, as you can see here on this slide. But I would actually also say that programmatic at the same time, because of the way we're doing programmatic digital advertising at the moment, is the killer of digital advertising, because as you may have heard, there's an enormous debate going on around fraudulent impressions, bot farms, fake reviews, fake fans, and so on and so forth. You may have also seen those ads for buy 1,000 fans for $5 and so on and so forth. So here you can see the average number of fraudulent impressions by the various different forms of digital advertising. And digital marketers or advertisers in general are very, very disturbed and concerned about this. So concerned, in fact, that with the World Federation of Advertisers, we have taken it upon ourselves to create a guideline for programmatic advertising with all the do's and the don'ts and the problems, but also maybe some solutions to those problems. And I want to share with you one other finding from that research that we did with programmatic advertising, because apart from all the bot fraud, there's also the fact that between what you spend on advertising and what actually reaches the consumer, in the worst case scenario, 60% of every dollar or rupee you spend on digital advertising through programmatic could end up with a bunch of different middlemen. So what I'm talking about is just the fact that there's a lot of bot fraud, as I mentioned, but there's also a lot of challenges around programmatic. And the other part of the challenge with programmatic is the fact that there is a number of middlemen that work throughout the system who have obviously a right to exist, but take away a number of, or take away a part of the money that you spend on programmatic. So from every dollar or rupee or euro you spend on programmatic, in the worst case scenario, 60% of that budget is eaten up by a bunch of different middlemen, be it DSPs or exchanges and so on and so forth. Meaning that from every $100 you spend on programmatic advertising, only $40 will actually reach the consumer. So there's two problems with programmatic. On the one hand, there's an enormous amount of potentially bot fraud and other kinds of things that will diminish the return on investment of digital advertising. And then if you use programmatic specifically, you may also lose up to 60% of each of your budget to all of the middlemen, meaning that ultimately your $100 or 100 rupees or whatever you spend on digital advertising through programmatic, ultimately about 35% may only reach the consumer. Marketers are incredibly disturbed about this. So whereas on the one hand they understand the opportunity and the benefits of digital advertising from a consumer point of view, because it's definitely where the consumer is migrating towards, the problem is that ultimately there is so much noise within that space, and there's so much loss within that space that it's kind of killing it before it can even take off. And so within the World Federation of Advertisers and within a number of local chapters of the World Federation of Advertisers, we're really trying to sort of address these issues and try and come up with a better way to find solutions for this. The other real challenge that people need to really get their heads around is the challenge of the changing infrastructure. So as you know, all of digital advertising, be it search or social media, your web page and so on and so forth, a lot of that is managed nowadays through algorithms. So that means that it is not actually human interaction that determines price and how it is exchanged and how it is traded, but it is a human interacting with algorithms. And that is true, as I mentioned, for today already for web advertising, search, social media, online video, and so on and so forth. The last bastion where that hasn't happened yet is TV and other traditional media. But about 2 years ago, IPG, which is the parent company to McCann Erickson and Universal McCann and a number of other big brands, have announced that they are going to automate 50% of their media buying, and that's all media buying, not just digital media. So 50% of all media buying they want to automate within 3 years, and they announced this in 2012. And just this week they have announced that they are now beginning to buy local broadcast television through a programmatic exchange. So that means that within 2 years since the announcement, they've gone from only digital media to now also traditional media bought and sold programmatically. And what it means is that if I'm Procter & Gamble and I'm marketing my brand Pampers, and I'm after housewives with children, I can tell the algorithm, buy me housewives with children, and this is the floor price that I'm willing to pay, this is the ceiling I'm willing to pay, here are the qualitative requirements for that buy, and I will now go and let the algorithm buy that airtime for me, rather than me calling up the station or the stations or having my agency do so, obviously. And this is going to have a tremendous impact going forward on the media industry as we know it. If I were a media buyer or a media seller today, I would have serious concerns about job security. And as an analogy, let's look at what happened in the stock market. So between the year 2001 and 2012, the buying and selling of equities went from just about 25% being bought and sold electronically, i.e. with an algorithm, to today almost 100%. It's about 95% of all equity trades are done through algorithms, through an exchange. Foreign currencies is a little over 50% today. Futures is also about 95% today. Options is about 85% today. And fixed income trades is at the bottom with about 50%. But having that kind of a trend changing between the year 2001, when it was 25% or less, and today where it's upwards to 95%, at the same time, staffing levels for broker-to-client trade support, so that means the people that are actually doing the trades, only 27% of brokers reported that their staffing levels had not changed. So that means, in other words, that 73% of brokers decreased their staffing levels, and it went from anywhere from 10% to 50% decreases. The number that I have found is that roughly 2/3 of manual broker personnel has disappeared. And so if you then go back to the media industry, where there's a lot of people employed in media buying and media selling at the agency and at the client side, I think we're looking at not just a sea change in how we buy and sell media and in a technological way, because that's the whole obviously the development of these exchanges, but also in terms of how agencies are employed and how agencies are staffed and so on and so forth. So this is going to be a tremendous sea change that is beginning to happen now here in the United States, which is beginning to happen in the UK, in a couple of other markets around Europe, and it will be a matter of when, not if, for other markets. So I think the real big challenges that marketers are facing today is not just the onslaught and the continuation of the whole ecosystem in itself, but also the constant change in how that ecosystem is actually equipped to help and support them to reach consumers. Which is why in our book Zero we have said you should forget about the idea of about the idea of paid media as the answer and as the starting point for all your campaigns. You should no longer think about being campaign centric or being brand centric. You really in today's world need to be consumer centric. And that is the best starting point to start developing your campaigns. And so when we say consumer-centric, that means having a real intimate and immediate knowledge of how the consumer is connected to your brand. What touch points do they like? What touch points do they use a lot? How are they interacting with those? And then to understand, do I as a brand have an invitation or an opportunity or a reason to be in that touch point? Because that's the other thing. Control has definitely relinquished to consumers. So rather than just blasting out messages through whatever touch point you can find that is relevant for the consumer, you also really in today's environment need to understand, do I have permission to be at that point in time in front of the consumer, or do I offer a utility that the consumer might appreciate when I'm at that point in time in front of the consumer? And that really is the sea change that we're seeing, that we say is really important now. And so zero paid media really doesn't talk about ditching all of your expenditure in media, but ultimately to make a shift in thinking from campaign centric or brand centric to consumer centric thinking, and to not just go after recruiting a consumer. People are familiar probably with the old AIDA model, which stood for attention, interest, desire, and action. What we're saying is the journey doesn't end with action. The journey doesn't end with converting a consumer and making them a purchaser or a buyer of your product or a user of your product. That actually is probably the starting point of the journey. Once you've convinced somebody and brought somebody on board, that's when the journey starts, that's when the hard work starts. And traditionally we've not, as marketers, spent a lot of money there, but that's what we're saying. Marketers going forward should spend far more attention and also probably investment into how do I incentivize people that are now part of my consumer family? How do I communicate or talk to consumers, and how do I respond when they talk to me? How do I make those consumers help me get more or additional consumers? So how can they help me grow my brand and market share? Because we all know that one of the most powerful messages today is a consumer saying something really positive about a brand. That is something that is far more trusted than a television ad or an online video ad. So how do we make that shift? How do we invest more in existing consumers and help them to drive consumer growth, on top of probably doing some paid media, but not start with paid media, but start with how do I use my own assets, for instance my consumers, to drive my media, drive my business. So ultimately the marketers are facing a challenge, and I've called that challenge the serpent. Right? So how do I slay the serpent? A very famous Greek mythological story about slaying the serpent. And the serpent for marketers is obviously an acronym. And so the S in serpent stands for security. How do I know that I made the right choices? How do I understand that those choices that I made were the right choices? And how do I defend those choices to the C-suite or to other stakeholders in the process? So how do I accomplish a sense of security around choice making in the new marketing environment? The E stands for efficiency. How do I maximize the impact of my budget within the new marketing economy? And as we've seen, the answer is probably not through just traditional media, because that position of traditional media certainly is being challenged, whether you're in India or in the United States or anywhere else. And you have to sort of come to grips with the fact that the media environment is far more complex, and you probably need to use a different media mix than what you've used before. The R in serpent stands for relevancy. How does it connect with my key consumers? And so the relevancy question really is what I mentioned before is, yes, there are a lot of touch points out there and a lot of new ways to connect with consumers. But it is equally important to think about, do I have permission to connect with my consumer there? Do I offer a utility or a piece of entertainment when I connect with the consumer there? So how do I ensure that that connection is not only present but is also relevant? The P in serpent stands for proven. How do I know it will work, or how do I know that it works? So this is really the ROI question. So what new or different or additional measures do I need to take in order to know that it worked, right? In the past, we used to depend on cost per thousand or cost per GRP, and now with all these new media, we probably need some new ones. E stands for engaged. How do I know I reached my target? How do I know it really was something that resonated with them beyond just being in front of them? New is the N in serpent. Stands for, did I include any relevant tech and new innovative ways of connecting with consumers? And finally, the T, which is my last point, is transparent. And we talked about the challenges from bot fraud to middlemen and so on and so forth. So how do I know that what I have invested reached my consumers in a transparent manner? Both through my agencies as well as through whatever exchanges I might be using. So slaying the serpent is really the challenge. You'll see that slide in the presentation. And again, I am not really sure why we couldn't share it, but that is basically my story for today. And I would like to see if there are any questions.
Maarten, you know, the world is going digital. We all know that, and there are quite a few specialist digital agencies which exist across the world. Given the fact that most of the spends are going to be on digital in the next few years, what, according to you, is the future of the traditional advertising and media agencies?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think they will change quite dramatically, and I think they're already placing bets on what that change will be. Right? They're all investing in programmatic platforms. They're all investing in technology. A lot of them are investing also in startups now that may or may not have a role to play in the future of the agencies. I think technology is what is going to ultimately really change the face of the agencies going forward. I think the programmatic platforms currently are probably let's say the current form of that change, but I think ultimately all media will go through those types of exchanges, and so a lot of the trading, as I mentioned, will change from being people-to-people trading, will be people push of the button and then algorithm trading, and so that means that an agency may not be necessary. If you're a really large marketer and you can afford the technology, such as a Procter & Gamble or a Coca-Cola, you may have those technologies in-house, and therefore you may not need an agency to buy the bulk of your reach and frequency. Where you do need people-to-people is when it become something special. So one of the things, for instance, if you're Coca-Cola, if you're investing in as a sponsor of the World Cup, or you're investing as Pepsi in the cricket, which I think they used to do in India, you know, a deal like that, which is a combination of airtime, but also sponsorship and on-the-ground activation, and maybe in-store activation and joint partnerships. Those types of deals, I do believe, will always require a person-to-person interaction because they are sort of tailor-made deals. But I think those deals obviously do not happen on a daily basis. So I think the majority of all of the media trading eventually will become more automated, which means that agencies will have a lot less people working within their buildings, because obviously an algorithm can do it a lot faster than a person can do it with an Excel spreadsheet.
Great, thank you, thank you. And Gaurav, do you have a question for Maarten?
Sure, thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Maarten. Very insightful presentation and some stats which we don't come across easily. My question is more around the use of programmatic. Now you also mentioned that programmatic is growing at the fastest rate in the digital advertising space. There are companies like Vizuri in India who are growing at 400% or more a year.
Yeah.
So does that mean that even though 60% of their spends is going to middlemen, the ROI which programmatic is delivering is worth the advertiser's money?
Yeah, this is a really good question. When I talked to, so we did that session at the WFA, the World Federation of Advertisers, on programmatic, and we that's when we launched the guide to programmatic advertising for marketers. And the marketers are basically saying, look, we feel like we're being caught between a rock and a hard place, right? The consumer is there, and so in order to reach the consumer, the technology is there. But the technology, in a lot of ways, is currently stacked against us and is stacked in favor of the owners of the technology, right? So a lot of the exchanges, there's a lot of money that goes to the middleman. As I mentioned, worst case scenario is 60% of every $100 goes to a whole sort of stack of middlemen. I have the slide in my presentation, so you'll see it when you get it. And then on top of that, once it does reach the consumer, depending on which form of programmatic or display or video, online video advertising, whatever you've chosen, another percentage goes away to basically fraudulent reach. And so the ultimate end result can be pretty dire. And so marketers feel like they're being caught between a rock and a hard place, because they're saying, look, it is relatively cheap, and we have ultimately the obligation to reach the consumer there, but at the same time we know that we're losing a lot of money, and so that's why this guide came out, to sort of give marketers an idea of what to do and what to look for. The other thing is, a lot of marketers are taking stuff in-house. So Kellogg's, for instance, here in the United States, have taken programmatic in-house. Procter & Gamble have taken programmatic in-house. There is a number of white label programmatic exchange solutions that you can now buy as a marketer, and then you can do it yourself. The problem, of course, is that it doesn't help to just have a piece of technology. You also need people that understand the technology, and that is the other challenge, which is where people really need to bring in new types of talent into the organization. And in today's world, that really hasn't. That is proving a big challenge, because those people are in high demand, and they probably prefer to work somewhere in Silicon Valley or in Silicon Alley here in New York, or in the Delhi Alley, or whatever it's called, in the Mumbai Alley in India. But ultimately, they are probably more interested and more challenged to go work there than to go, say, work in Cincinnati at Procter & Gamble to work on an exchange there. So it's a real challenge at the moment, but it's a temporary challenge that I think over time will solve itself.
Maarten, I have a question. Today there's a lot of information bombarded to us that does not interest me on social media. So if this increases, it may turn me off. So what are the future tools to connect with my target audience, Martin?
Yeah, if I had a crystal ball, I'd be as rich as Mark Zuckerberg, probably. But it's a really good question. There is a lot of challenge around the uber proliferation, if you like, of social media and new social media. On my slide that says I am at Malbarda, you'll see a lot of different logos. Some of you may know, and some of them you may not know. So the challenge really is as a marketer is to find out which ones really matter. And that's why we push so much on marketers to become consumer-centric rather than product or campaign or brand-centric. But what I would also say is that ultimately, at the other end of that spectrum is don't believe the hype, right? There was a couple of months ago a new social media app that came out in the mobile space called Yo. And literally the only thing that little app does is you can send each other a message that says, yo, right? Nothing else. And so everyone is talking about how fast this was growing and how fantastic this thing was going to be, and it was valued immediately at God knows how many millions of dollars. And I think today we have already found that it is sort of, gone a little bit more quiet. Because it was the hype of the day and probably wasn't all that sustainable. Now everybody's talking about a social media network called Ello, E-L-L-O, which claims it is the anti-Facebook because it will never do any advertising and it is completely clutter-free. And so that now is something that people were talking about a lot, and so that's the latest craze of this month. And who knows what it will be next month, right? I think ultimately as marketers you also need to sort of keep a cool head a little bit, and whether it's your agency or developers or whoever it might be, the hype of the day doesn't immediately translate to a real big opportunity. And it actually is not a bad thing if you're a major marketer to maybe sit on the fence a little bit, not too long, right? It pays to experiment, and it pays to learn about these things, but at the same time, don't feel you have to jump in to every latest little thing that comes across your desk. Wait until you see a little bit of data, until you have a little bit of an understanding of whether it is a real thing or whether it's just, the hype or the craze of the day.
Recently, you had shared an article on LinkedIn which talked about buying media in bulk, where some of the top agencies in the world have given commitments to Twitter and Facebook of hundreds of millions of dollars. So does that mean that digital media buying might go the way traditional media buying is today, which might mean kickbacks and discounts from the publishers, and the bigger your yearly spending, the more you make?
Without a question, especially if you're an agency, that is what you want, right? Because you're looking to replace the losses over time that you're going to make in traditional media. And traditional media still makes up the majority of a media agency's business, and they're also still doing very big global traditional media deals, right? Whether it's with Rupert Murdoch's Empire or with Clear Channel or what have you, right? So those deals are still being made as well. But I think ultimately where they are really trying to make money today is in the space of digital media. And so they've all done big deals with Facebook, with Google, with Twitter, and so on and so forth, because they are trying to do they're trying to replace some of the revenues that they've lost on some of the traditional media. I think as marketers we should be really concerned about that, because ultimately it challenges the impartiality of these media agencies. Because the point that I made in my article was that if I have a commitment to Twitter for 100 million or 200 million or whatever, and the CFO at the global agency headquarters is tracking that investment, and he sees that we're not going to make it, then there's going to be pressure on the local markets to make sure that we do make that commitment, because there is a financial incentive probably at the end of the day for the agency group as well. So it biases the impartiality of agencies. And again, this is another reason why some marketers are taking some of this technology in-house themselves. So rather than relying on a global deal from WPP with Twitter or with Publicis and Twitter or Facebook or whatever, they'll do their own deal and they'll build their own technology stack to take it in-house. However, the number of marketers that can really do that effectively and that have, let's say, the technical wherewithal and technical understanding of to be able to do that kind of thing, that's a very small group. Most marketers ultimately will have to rely on agencies to do it, and so we'll have to find ways to make those agencies more transparent and make the agency dealings more transparent, and that will be a continuous challenge going forward.
Okay, so we have a question. Thanks, Maarten. We have a question from Sunakshi.
Yeah, I can read it here. Let's see here. Integrated Marketing Communication Area of India. I think the biggest challenge for marketers in general, as I've mentioned, is to move away from campaign-centric or brand-centric to consumer-centric. And I think that is very much the case in India as well. I think we've seen some wonderful examples coming out of India that have done really well also on the global stage in global awards that were very cleverly constructed and very cleverly created integrated marketing communications platforms rather than just a campaign or a one-off idea. So I think there's definitely opportunity there, but I think right now they are the exceptions to the rule, and what I would push for is to make that more the rule, if you like. So I think the opportunity is to evolve more of those types of campaigns, and there's a number of advertisers who are really pushing that themselves as well. So if you look at how Unilever is changing the way they approach marketing, if you look at how Heineken is changing the way they approach marketing, I think the challenge is for some of the big traditional Indian advertisers is to follow those examples and to challenge themselves to basically try and do more of that, because I think it is proven that it can be done in India, because we've seen these examples reach even the global stage and the global award ceremonies and actually win some of them. So it can be done successfully. So I think Indian marketers should challenge themselves to just do more of it and to find to build a better mousetrap. Maybe is the way to explain that.
Maarten, I believe I asked this question to all the all the speakers. Is if you had $1 million to invest, which would be the one idea you would invest today in?
It would be Gaurav's idea, of course, because I help him with his endeavor. No, where would I invest $1 million today? I think I would invest $1 million today in technology, in consumer analytics technology, because if you're going to put the consumer at the center, and if you want to be successful in building connections with consumers, I would invest in a solution that would help me understand that consumer better. So I would probably invest it in some form of a big data analysis.
Thanks, Maarten.
But Maarten, with technology, what's hot and happening today could be obsolete tomorrow. So isn't there a bit of a risk in investing in technology companies in the current day?
There is for sure risk, but there's, I think, risk in any investment. But I think that's a fair point. And I think I'm not sure that I would know which technology stack, but I would still make that bet, because I think I'd be more interested in investing in a consumer analytics technology than anything else in order to help me connect with consumers in a better, more relevant way.
So thanks, Maarten, for taking time on a bright and sunny morning.
That was so nice.
Thanks
Thank
very
you
much,
so much.
guys. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Maarten.